This Choircast podcast is brought to you in part by the Liminal Living Podcast. Liminal, the word 1,000 miles wide but small enough to fit into the present moment. It describes an in-between place. We live most of our lives within this space, not quite ever arriving at our idealistic final destination. We spend so much of our energies on our best impersonation of who we wish we were, until we can't. But in sneaks a dark night of the soul, or perhaps a mystical experience. Our way of being has an error loop introduced. Today we call that deconstruction. Welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast, where we teach you how to be here, how to traverse these spaces, and where we can go if we remain humble, open, and honest.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. This is Not Church. And the tagline is if it were church, you would have left by now. But honestly, I don't know. I would want to go to a church like this. I would want to go to a church that has honest conversations, that has a little bit of cursing and a general idea of seeking after God. And I just think that's actually really beautiful. So maybe you wouldn't leave if this actually was church. I'm here. My name is Bethany. I'm here with my co-host, John. You want to say hi, John?
Hi, John.
There you go. Keeping it up. Nat is out of town and not with us right now, but we have a wonderful person that we get to interview today on the podcast today. Her name is Regina V Cates. She is an author, an activist, a podcaster, and the founder of Romancing Your Soul, which is an organization that helps people develop lives of love, compassion, and purpose. Her first internationally best-selling book, Lead with Your Heart, Creating a Life of Love, Compassion, and Purpose, continues to be an inspiration to people who desire a more fulfilled life. And Regina is followed by hundreds of thousands on social media who embrace her messages of kindness, compassion, and empathy for one another as equal members of our human family. She has a new book out, and we'll probably be talking about it today beyond just like getting to know her. But her new book is called The Real Conversation Jesus Wants Us to Have, a call to bravery, peace, and love. So welcome to the podcast, Regina. We're glad that you're here.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with you today, too.
Yeah, thanks. And is your book actually out fully where people can buy it anywhere at this point?
The book is available on March 4th.
March 4th. Okay,
yeah.
Cool. So people can pre-order it if they'd like?
Absolutely. They can pre-order it. That'll be great.
Awesome. Well, one of the questions that we love to start off with any of the people that we volunteer or that we interview, is just kind of curious about your faith journey, like where you, like your background in your faith, what led you to who you are today and what that experience has been like.
I hope that we've booked like 3 weeks. Is that long enough, or should we just start with the first 3 weeks and then we'll go into more recordings as time is necessary? Wow. That's a bit to unpack, isn't it? And the reason for my book, which is interesting. So that really explains all of it in there. But to give it in a, let's say, 5-minute response, I was raised in the southern part of the United States in a fundamentalist Christian church, the Church of Christ, in Victoria, Texas. I was gay and still am, by the way, haven't been converted. It didn't work. None of that worked. But I knew when I was about 4.5 years old when it dawned on me that I was different from anybody else. And so sitting there listening to this, you're going to hell, blah, 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 blah. You have to change. You're going to, all of this stuff that they talk about constantly. I started asking questions of myself about my faith. What do I believe? What do I believe God is? What do I believe Jesus? Because the contradictions that I am receiving from the pulpit and from Sunday school and vacation Bible school and everything else just didn't make any sense to me, even as a child. And so my faith journey has been one of incorrigible questioning. I am the child that said, but what about? I was not popular for sure. But I never stopped questioning. And I never will, I don't believe, until I draw my last breath. I deeply, with a very strong faith, believe in a power greater than myself. I believe it's the original creative consciousness. It does not have a gender. It does not have a form that we put it into. And I believe that Jesus was an enlightened messenger sent to earth to try to help us wake up. And I don't believe that that consciousness has ever left the planet. So in a nutshell, that's it. Hopefully I kept it under 5 minutes.
No, that was great. I love that you have this curiosity and this questioning spirit that's been with you since you were a child. And do you still feel like that still exists in you today?
Oh my goodness, it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. Absolutely. Yeah, especially in the political climate, in the geopolitical climate that we have. Absolutely. And I know you've already had a guest to talk about Christian nationalism. I very briefly touch on that in my book. But with everything that's going on and with the history of Christianity, with the history of subjugation of women, now is the time for us really to look at these issues and talk about them as if Jesus were sitting next to us. And we can't bullshit Jesus. I mean, we can. They try constantly. But we really cannot do that. Not if we're really devoted to loving our neighbor as ourselves and being part of the positive change that we want to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you, have you been able to have any spaces of table fellowship, for lack of a better term, with people that think differently from you in those spaces? Or what is that like when you think of Jesus sitting across from you at a table? What does that mean for you?
I think that Jesus would listen to every single point of view, but also I think that there's a thread that would run through his messages. And that is, how do you treat your neighbor? How do you love your neighbor as yourself when diversity was part of his world? There are so many things that were a part of Jesus's world that we just want to say, no, they didn't exist at that particular point in time. But I think the first thing he would do was listen. But also, Jesus turned over the tables of the tax collectors that he didn't think belonged in the temple. And I believe that, as this book states, that he is not going to be just one of those lovey-lovey, let's sit around, sing Kumbaya and do that. It's about really getting into what it is that I said, Jesus, not me, Jesus said for us to do, and that's love your neighbor as yourself. And how do you do that in our world today? So, yeah, I think he would listen, but I also think he would say, well, wait a minute, hang on just a second. That's not true. That's not right. That's not a lie. That's your agenda. It's not what I told you to do or how to be.
Well, I think we have de-radicalized Jesus in a lot of ways over the years. And I think one of the things that we need to kind of relook at is that Jesus was a radical. He was subversive. A lot of people are like, well, I follow Jesus, so I don't get political.
Jesus was political.
Jesus got political. And to say that Jesus wasn't political is to miss the point, I think. Wouldn't you agree?
I think so, because Jesus was a Jew and he wasn't a Christian too. So there's a lot of people out there that argue with me that he was a Christian. You know, there's so much misinformation, and I think that one of the reasons that I spent so much of my life studying my faith journey and really getting into it was so that I would be able to write this particular book to ask questions that we are never encouraged to ask because it's sacrilegious. And I think that one of those things, and I say it right up front, is that the conversations that we will have with Jesus, are not going to be just pleasant. He's going to want to know what the hell that we still have misogyny after all of this time. He's going to want to know why to a lot of these things that we have not addressed in 2,000 years.
Yeah. I think that when we take the words of Jesus seriously, they will confront us in our complacency, in our indifference, in our hatred, in our bigotry, in our racism and sexism, and all these different areas of our lives that are often facilitated as normal, at least in many sects of Christianity and especially American Christianity. And I think Jesus' words are just so confronting. And that's like, I can never get enough of them. I'm so compelled by his words. And it's obvious that you are too, based on the things you wrote in your book.
Well, I think that we need to separate Christianity from Jesus.
That's good.
I do, because Jesus didn't write the Bible. Jesus was not alive when the Bible was written. Many people don't realize how many years, including hundreds of years, before the Bible actually came about. They don't realize that until, I believe, around the 1500s, it was illegal and punishable by death to have your own copy. So people interpreted Scripture for you. And so I think that we need to be very, very careful. In fact, I separate the two completely. I really do. I appreciate that people want to have something to read. It's an ancient book. That's great. But so much of it is so contradictory. Like the four Gospels, they each contradict one another. And so in today's society where everybody wants to have something hand delivered, there is no critical thinking. There is no thought about, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Would Jesus actually say that? Would he actually believe that?
It's interesting that you bring that up, because we've had other people on where they talk about the inerrancy of the Bible, right, and how it's specific. And at the beginning of all of this, that wasn't even a question. It was that inerrancy was what the Bible was. But this seems to be something that, and specifically in American churches, that we can't live without. But the Bible has to be infallible, has to be the true word of God as a conduit from God down to these people who wrote it. And I guess my question to you is, how do you look at the Bible and its conflicts? It's not inerrant, in my opinion, and I don't know if that's the same opinion you have or not.
Well, I believe that the Bible has human fingerprints all over it, and one of the best things I can say is the example of the Lord's Prayer, and also the many translations of the Bible from the original into Latin and Greek and all of these other. But the Lord's Prayer and how King Henry VIII wanted it to be written a certain way, and how we come along and we want things written a certain way so that it supports the rulers of the time, supports the beliefs of the time. And I think that whenever we think anything is infallible, then we get into a lot of trouble, because we were not there to witness. We can take the most beautiful parts of the Bible, but when you get into all of these other things to justify behavior that it would never be aligned with the integrity of Christ, then we have a real problem. And I think that Christianity from the very beginning has been filled with people that have their own agenda.
Yeah, and you have to do all the work that you possibly can just to keep that infallibility intact. And so it takes so much effort to hold on to those spaces of believing.
Well, it does. And here's the interesting part, because you've got scientific studies and data that human sexuality is not a choice that we make. So if you're going to hold true to those 7 clobber verses in the Bible, then you need to know why they were written, who they were written for. Do you want to know that historical evidence is that when one male army beat another male army, then they raped the losers? Do you want to use that as part of it? But no, they don't want to. So my point being, and we can go into other things like that, but my point is, if you start unraveling these things, and if you start listening to the stories of people like me who have been born this way, then it causes you to question everything that you've been indoctrinated to believe. Because as a child, I didn't have a choice where I went to church. So we are indoctrinated to believe whatever the belief system is of our parents. Later on, we might make a decision to go off and try something else or do something, which I have done. But you're looking at a belief system and religions throughout the world that indoctrinate their followers into a specific belief system because someone is telling them exactly what to believe. Why are they the ones that are chosen to do that? God speaks to us every day in real time. It happens to you too. You know that. We have experiences of it. What if we get rid of all of this other stuff and we just listen to God directly? What if we just do that? There's no middleman, so to speak.
So when you were deconstructing some of these things that you were handed, the types of theology that were incredibly damaging and belittling of your personhood, did you have people in your life that were there to catch you when you fell? Were they gentle? What was that like for you? Was it isolating?
Completely, because even God hated me. That's exactly what I was told. That's what I talk about in the book. Even God hated me, see, because that's what they told me to believe. So I had absolutely no one. I had nature, I had sports, I had pretty much nobody to talk to. And so I really started in earnest probably when I went off to school and I was exposed to other people, went off to college and exposed to other people and other belief systems. And then I just started doing investigative research on my own. But I always had something deep within my heart. I call it the BS meter. And it's always been very finely tuned to BS. I just have this great ability to do that. And even as a child sitting in the pew on Sunday, it was just like, no. But to answer your question, it's very sad that we are indoctrinating people to hate themselves, to feel less than. This in the name of God, in the name of religion. That is that's exactly the opposite of the edict or the direction that God gave to every single religion on earth, at least the major ones. Treat others as you want to be treated. It's found in every major faith. And so that means that whatever that was instrumental in creating all of the world's religions. Christianity does not have a corner on the God market.
That's right. That's good. I was curious about, when I was reading your book, it sounded like that experience you had with the Lakota, what was that? The sauna essentially,
well, it's a Native American church. Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just how that, maybe that was part of your deconstruction. I wasn't sure, but it just sounded like that was something where God held you gently, even while you were in deep discomfort. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that here?
It's interesting. Most people want to know about that. It's such an amazing experience.
Yeah.
And it really did. I think I was prepared from all of the work that I had done internally to go through that particular experience. And it was beautiful. 3.5 hours of intense sweating, intense heat, and 3.5 hours of the most beautiful releases, because you realize that your body is a lot stronger than you think it is. And you realize, at least I did for me, that we are not, our soul is separate from our body. Our body is a vehicle for the spiritual being that we are. And that part took over because I surrendered to that part that day. There was nothing else that I could do about it other than surrender completely. And at that point, all of these wonderful realizations came in. And it really did allow me to be free for the very first time in my life of all of this religious dogma that I've carried. It's not for everybody. I'm not making, the statement that you need to go out and have this particular thing. Somebody could experience this when they go out and they immerse themselves in nature. But I had the opportunity to do this. And it's a life-changing event. It's one of the most beautiful things that I've ever participated in. And for those people that are willing, then something like that can maybe bust open the core, the rock that's been surrounding you all of your life. And it gives you the freedom to think something beyond what you've been told to believe.
Yeah, I thought that was very well written, first of all. I mean, I felt like it was, even just reading it, I could feel the intensity of it. It put like a dichotomy on me where it was like half of me was like, this sounds amazing. I'd love to do this. No, I wouldn't.
Well, if I had the opportunity today and go and do one with a Native American church and be invited to that, I would do it today because it's such a beautiful experience. I don't know if my body would tolerate it as well as it did when I was younger, but it was truly life-changing. It was transformative. As I say in the book, nothing ever got me close to what I realized that day. Nothing.
Yeah, the way you described it made me feel like I was living it with you, and obviously not in any form or anything, but just this, I don't know, I just kept imagining this release that kept happening over and over again, and a deep understanding of yourself and how your fears aren't the boss of you anymore. I mean, it was so beautiful. And I really appreciate you adding it to this book because it created a beauty. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I have to tell you that I believe that particular chapter really it sets the stage for folks to be able to take the questions that I have asked of myself and give them the freedom in the privacy of their own home or in a study group to ask themselves these questions too, and to have their own Native American Inipi release, but they don't have to go through what I went through. So that really is important that you've made that particular connection, but because for me, that's exactly what I intended when I shared that particular story. This needs to be our collective Native American Inipi ceremony.
In a way, that's what this podcast is about. It's asking people, well, not giving permission, but saying you ask the hard questions. Be willing to be one of the people to stand up and say, wait a minute, what about? And then, whatever these tough questions are. For me, growing up in a church like you, I was kind of shunned for asking questions. I've told the story so many times on the podcast. I don't want to reiterate the whole thing, but I mean, it came down to a conversation with my parents and the pastor, basically asking them to tell me not to ask so many questions in church. And to my parents, what my parents chose to do is not tell me about that conversation. But kids are smart and they figure it out. And I figured out pretty early on that questions just weren't accepted. Did you feel the same? Did you get any kind of similar feedback or any similar feelings that these questions were not really welcomed in the church?
Absolutely. Don't you still get that today?
Well, I'm not in church.
Well, I'm not in church either, but just don't we have that same thing throughout society? Don't we have that?
Yes.
We're not supposed to ask questions. What does that sound like to you?
Well, oppression for one thing.
Exactly. It's oppression. It's that you need to buy this and you need to not ask any questions whatsoever because I know what's best for you. No, that's not true. And unless we ask questions and unless we are willing to go down that often very scary road, then we're not going to expand who we really are. And that's the spiritual nature. We're supposed to have a relationship with whatever that is. It could be through nature. It could be through helping the poor. It could be through whatever. It doesn't have to be a physical location. But in my belief system and what I have come to understand is if we're going to go to church, then it needs to be about why we should be there. And that is what Jesus did, helping the marginalized in society, standing up for them. And all of these other things that we think of him being and advocating. So yes, of course not. We're not supposed to ask questions. I'm not supposed to ask questions of my parents either. See, because it's all about control. It's been like that from the very beginning. And why is it that we don't ask more questions about why? What's the point of not asking questions? Because I'm supposed to fall in line and be okay with whatever you say. I'm sorry, but no, it's not how that works.
Well, and we're not taught how to ask questions in so many ways, not just as children and being in a church community and being fed the answers all the time. And then if you ask a question, you get in trouble. But even like people that we have this steady diet of whatever news media that we listen to, or, TikTok or whatever it is that we're using as our source. And if we only have that information coming at us and we don't know how to ask questions, then we just receive it without any curiosity or anything. We just okay, this is the way it is. And so I think it's just the way that our society is set up at this point. And I don't know what to do about that. I don't know how to teach these younger generations or even the generation that I'm from right now, how to question the voices that they keep hearing and why those voices say what they say. And I think what you're saying there, Regina, about getting out into nature is one of the best ways that allows us to all the noise that we listen to and consume every day to settle down, to be filled with wonder once again, and to be what is going on in the world?
Well, first of all, I think we should be suspicious of anybody who says, trust me, believe me, just because they say, trust me and believe me. I don't think that that's okay, because that's how people abuse somebody else, whether it's your parents, whether it's your boyfriend, whether it's your girlfriend, whether it's the folks that want to rule everything for whatever reason to enrich themselves. I don't think we should just be that trusting. And I also think that there's an easier solution to all of this, and that is that we need to teach our children about integrity. And part of integrity, it's the most important thing, is integrity. It's how you treat other people, how you treat yourself. If you have integrity, you're going to ask questions, because you're not going to be okay with behavior that goes against the integrity of who Jesus was and the integrity of who we are to how we are supposed to behave if we say we love Jesus. So I find it very interesting that people that can have absolutely zero integrity call themselves Christians. It doesn't work like that, because I think that Christ would want his name removed from the religion created in his honor if these people justify behaving however they want to behave and teaching their children that it's not important to love your neighbor. It's important to get your latest video or whatever. We have to understand that we have created this, but I want to challenge both of you to think and entertain. Hasn't this been how organized religion has been from the very beginning?
And I find that interesting because that was another chapter in your book that I find interesting with that. Now I can't remember the title of the chapter.
What was the topic? I can help you out.
Religion's dogma is ancient.
Yeah, it is. It is ancient. It's very ancient. Locusts were a delicacy. They did not have the internet. They didn't have electric lights. You walked around or you rode a donkey. This is the high-speed transportation was a donkey. It really was. So a lot of this has to do with education. A lot of it has to do with history. A lot of it has to do with just the culture that was around back then. Women had zero power, zero. We still have very little, but we had zero, no power whatsoever. And so what is it that we need to teach our children? We need to be very honest with our children about what's the most important thing that you can have in life, and that is be a person of integrity. And I think a lot of the things that will clean themselves up. And I also think that we need to help kids turn off technology, just like we need to help adults turn off technology. I do not get my news from social media. I might be weird, but I sort of am old school that I actually want fact, and I want people to put it to me in 3 or 4 different ways so that they have proven to me that it is fact and not just pulled right out of where.
I was thinking about how much that oftentimes we don't ask questions because we're uncomfortable with the answer or we're afraid of the answer that we might get. I just kept thinking about how back to that Lakota experience that you had where that was a place of extreme discomfort, where you allowed yourself to be incredibly uncomfortable. And I think that if we can foster more spaces of allowing the questions to sit without having to provide answers, just allow them to be what they are in a room or in a journal or just towards a friend without having to meet that question with a specific answer. It's almost like we get to teach ourselves how to sit with the discomfort of that, living in that tension essentially of not knowing all the things all the time.
I think so too. And I think that as I question everything. I really do. I question everything because I find it fun. I do. I'm wired that way. I just think it's the greatest thing ever. Like, why is he laying like that? It's interesting when you look at your dog and you ask questions of, he never answers, but maybe someday. But I think that we need to give the people that we share space with, and that could be the person at the grocery store, it could be our family, it could be anybody, the freedom to just be themselves, to experience emotion, to experience not knowing what it is. I don't believe that I have all of the answers, but what I do believe very strongly is that if I stay aligned with integrity, and if I care about someone else's feelings and their thoughts, then I'm going to open up dialogue and give them a safe space. We need to create safe spaces for one another. It doesn't have to be in a church setting. It can be in a non-church setting, but we have to have dialogue with one another, and we have to listen to one another, not to make somebody else wrong and ourselves right. That's complete ego. But to just say, listen, I thought about this. I want to give you the freedom to do that too. So I agree with you 100%. But I do think that there are some big questions that we need to answer, and we need to be all on the same page about what the right answers are.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, and that brings me to another title. And I'm not gonna look it up this time. I'm just gonna paraphrase it. But it's basically the chapter that says sometimes we have to turn the other cheek and sometimes we don't.
Oh yes, hello, yes. Let's do that 7 times 70. What is that abuse? I'm sorry, but doesn't that sound like that? You're setting yourself up for abuse. If you're just going to no, somebody does something, they lie to me or whatever, I might give them the benefit of the doubt for the second time. But believe me, as Maya Angelou said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And I think that we are dumbing ourselves down tremendously at the expense of our culture, our society, and maybe the safety of our children and the planet as a whole by not saying no to these kinds of behavior. And part of the reason I wrote this book is because I want all people out there who admire Jesus or what he stood for, or just are not even affiliated with any religious, who admire people of integrity, to stand up and call people on this stuff. It's like, why do we still have misogyny? Why are we so in, or at least those people who are in power right now making decisions for all of us, thank you, about autonomy over my body? What is your belief system based on? If you go back and you actually look at it, it's 100% political, because in Jesus's day, there was birth control. In Jesus's day, there were ways to eliminate an unwanted pregnancy. And don't take my word for it. Go to the internet and religious scholars and figure it out for yourselves. But don't believe that all of this stuff that you have been told to believe and programmed to believe, because it's costing people their lives. It's costing people autonomy. That's not okay.
Right. Well, and if Jesus continually and always turned the other cheek, we wouldn't have had a situation where he flipped the tables.
That's correct. Like, oh, okay, that's okay. The greedy and the wealthy, just take everything from us. It's fine. We just want to be led. No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Well, and I think that when it comes to forgiveness isn't always a restoration of relationship either. Sometimes
That's
forgiveness is releasing that person, whatever they did to you, while also saying, I will never be in a relationship with them again, unless an act of God comes through. Like, this person is actually really unhealthy and toxic and has done so much damage, and still knowing their character will continue to do the damage if we continue forth in relationship. And so forgiveness is like releasing, but it's not restoring all the time.
Well, forgiveness is releasing the energy that we cling to because we want something to be different or whatever. We withhold forgiveness because of whatever. Okay. But for me, forgiveness is just cutting that emotional tie that I've had to that person that hurt me or wounded me. I'm not upset with any of the people that don't like me because I'm gay and they wield the Bible around me. That's bothering me, not them. They could care less. They really don't. But forgiveness is also not forgetting. It's not excusing. It's not rationalizing. It's not justifying. It's not making another excuse after the same excuse and another one. It's not that. We have to understand that we can forgive, but we must never forget. We're not wired to forget.
Right. And unfortunately, the church has put forgiveness in the hands of the abuser, where
That's correct.
They want forgiveness so they can move on. And they can forget the abuse that someone in their with power in their church did. And it's not about, and what we're talking about is forgiveness is you as the one being abused in a situation or harmed, cutting that from your life and saying, you no longer have power over me. And yes, I won't forget what you did.
No, we can't, because I was sexually abused. I was thrown into a psychiatric unit for being gay. I have a lot of stuff in life that I could dwell on, and I could keep that energetic cord out there. But I don't forgive those people who have abused me in the way that I ever forget what they've done. I've forgiven myself for thinking that any of that could have been different. That is extremely important differentiation, okay? I don't forgive people that consciously choose evil over good. Let me tell you what I believe sin is. Sin is something that we do over and over. We know it's wrong, but we keep doing it. I think a mistake is something that we might do one or two times and then we learn from that. So I have a real problem with people calling me a sinner. Okay? Because I'm not. I am not going to drive and drink, because that would be something that if I did it over and over, that to me would be a sin, because I know that it might harm me or somebody else. You see? So there's a difference in there. Everything that we've been programmed to believe, guys, by these people that want us to believe a certain thing, there's always something that you can find that is like, whoa, wait a minute. You know, I'm not supposed to feel this guilty. I'm not supposed to feel this crappy about myself, not when God is supposed to be love. That's why they have this wrathful idea. I'm sure you read the little turtle story, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That was told to me. Isn't that amazing that someone would tell me that?
Terrible.
Oh, yeah. But how many of us can say the same thing about our experience?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Well, and I think sometimes we're so programmed from our childhood development within the church that we are nothing, that we are a worm, that we're sinful, that we're ashamed towards God, and or God is ashamed about us. And when we deconstruct or remove some of those harmful patterns that we were raised with, and realize that, at least from my perspective, that God is ultimately love more than anything else, and that we are lovable more than anything else, that God doesn't see us through the blood of Jesus. God just sees us as his beloved children, no matter what. When we deconstruct that, sometimes, at least I've noticed this in myself, less now, but when I was younger for sure, and definitely in some of my parishioners, that when they make mistakes or when they sin or when something bad has happened that they've involved themselves in, or something bad happened to them, it's like they're trying to receive the love of God, like to believe that for themselves, while at the same time trying to bully themselves because they believe that they deserve shame. And God's just like, I love you. And they're like, but I'm not worth it. And it's just this back and forth. It takes so much effort to release all of that programming that causes deep, deep despair within us, that we believe that we're nothing, that we're a worm. How have you been able to undo a lot of that in your own life? Like to be able to receive who you are as a beloved person?
I think it goes back to being an inquisitive child and thinking that if God loved Jesus so much that God sent Jesus to earth to help bring a new level of loving consciousness, then what about all of this other crap that's going on? Okay. So I think part of what saved me is that I never believed that I was horrible, because I knew somewhere deep inside that this was how I was born. This wasn't a choice I made. Nobody seduced me into this lifestyle at 4.5. This wasn't a result of anything other than some sort of interesting biological or genetic draw. That's what it was. And for some reason, even as a young person, I realized that. And so no matter what hell I went through with other people sending this stuff to me, there were times that I hated myself for being born different. But I always came back to this, well, wait a minute. God loves me. God has to love me because God made me perfectly the way I am. Why am I supposed to feel so horrible about myself? God is not telling me this. Somebody else is telling me that God hates me, but God hasn't said, I hate you. See, I really didn't have anybody, even God, because I wasn't willing to listen to God at that point when I was young. But I started listening. And when I did listen to that positivity, then that definitely helped save my life. I considered suicide for sure. I think a lot of people do that are brought up in the church. Yeah, it's like we can't win. There's no reason to do it.
Well, I mean, for me, it was, even when I was younger, you would be preached that God loves you. But when I was younger, I felt like, well, God has to love me. So it almost felt like there wasn't much there for me. I mean, okay, so God says, but it almost felt like God says, yeah, I love you. You're a piece of crap, but I guess I said I'm supposed to love you. For me, where it switched was when I realized that God likes me.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a difference between like and love. Good point.
And that if God was a person, he would sit down and have a cup of coffee with me in a coffee shop, and we'd have a nice, amazing conversation. That's when things switched for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there was
that.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a point for you.
I think the sweat lodge, but I also think there's just looking around in church, and I think one of the things you've just brought back a memory. I remember sitting in church when there was a woman sitting in front of us, and the guy up front was saying, "Well, the husband has been excommunicated because he wants a divorce," and I thought, "What the?" Even as a young child, this stuff went on quite a bit. So I thought, how can you have a loving God and also this horrible judgmental God at the same time? I asked that question. What makes that God different than Satan? Okay, seriously, if you don't. So for me, I think it was always about survival, because there's got to be more to this than I'm being told. I told you I was pretty incorrigible as a kid and still am as an adult, for sure. I really am. We do not need to be preaching hate in the name of God or Jesus ever again. Ever. look what it's creating.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. You have a podcast that you host as well, right?
I have 2 podcasts, but those are older podcasts. One of them is The Conversation Jesus Wants Us to Have, where I interviewed about 27 thought leaders on this. And the other one is Lead With Your Heart. But those are older podcasts. I do not host a podcast currently, no. I'm on Substack. I do some other stuff, but no.
Okay. So that's kind of some of the avenues that you have then with Substack and the books, where you're able to speak out towards the certain injustices that you've experienced in your own personhood and the ones that you want to help other people come to terms with and to rise above. Is there like another avenue that you have as well that creates more spaces for justice and peace in the communities that you help care for?
Well, I've got a fairly big presence on Facebook and some folks on Instagram, and every day we're talking about how to make the planet a better place, how to be the positive change you want to see. So I interact with a global community. I believe that with this particular release of this book in March, that the opportunities for engagement are going to grow exponentially. And I'm very much looking forward to having those conversations. And so what I've done in the past with the first book and everything else is sort of set the stage for becoming prepared and, I guess, excited about having a conversation with the world about what I imagine Jesus would want us to talk about.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, it's just that, your book is so compelling in so many ways. This last Sunday, we're going through Luke's gospel at the church that I pastor, and the passage of scripture was Luke 12, the end of Luke 12, where Jesus is saying that he hasn't come to bring peace, but he's come to bring division. And it just feels like so opposite of like the peace-loving Jesus that so many of us have in our mind. It reminds me of a lot of the Jesus that did turn over the tables. But within that, I was also reflecting on Martin Luther King Jr. We're recording this on his day of remembrance. And he wrote, "True peace is not merely the absence of tension. It is the presence of justice." And that really like connected with me because of how much, at least for myself, on the Enneagram, I am a 9, and a 9 is a peacemaker. But in my shadow side, or in the harder parts of my life, I am a peacekeeper. I try to avoid conflict. I want to make sure that everybody gets along, that we are all unified. And even the quote I just read was from his letter at the Birmingham jail, where he was being really like exposing this sense of call for unity that is good for the white person and incredibly damaging for the Black person who is living through the civil rights era. So I'm curious, like, what has it looked like for you to be a peacemaker, to be someone who actually like moves and pushes against those dominant narratives that say, don't rock the boat, don't make waves, make sure that you keep going with the status quo. Like, what does that look like in your life?
It looks like the day that I was born, gay. It looks like,
Yes.
Okay, here's a very interesting twist. I'm not going to fit the mold that everybody wants me to fit. And so how do I navigate this? How do I forgive those people? How do I have a relationship with my parents, which I did, and I still do with my father, who's 101. By the way, I was adopted. And so my mother just passed away this past August. She was almost 100. And my dad's 101, lives in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I had to make peace with them so that they could be okay with me. And I think it's because I mirrored what I thought Jesus would do. And so we're going to disagree with people, but we can find a peaceful middle ground. We can find the place that we want to be, because we're always going to have people that want to control us and dominate us and sell us to the highest bidder and get all of the money in the world. For what reason, I have no idea. It doesn't bring peace or love. But those of us who really are interested in having a genuine relationship with whatever that consciousness is that's out there, that is love, then we have to do the work, the hard work of putting our ego aside. We can have hard conversations in very soft ways, we can have conversations that change the planet in very big ways. When we put our ego aside and we listen as we want to be heard, when we speak to others as we want to be spoken to, when we hear people and what they're trying to tell us. So I am a peacemaker, but I turn over tables constantly, because if we continue with the status quo, we're going to continue to have exactly what we've gotten. And kiddos, today, we are seeing that it's time for us to do something big. It's time for a giant spiritual evolution on this planet, or else the human species and everything else is going to go bye-bye. And those of us that actually give something to this effort are to be commended, because we're not trying to tell people to believe what we believe, but we're trying to get folks to actually question what it is they believe and then come to some belief system that is good for more than just themselves.
Yeah.
So I take the gloves off. I'm okay with that. Yeah, I don't have a problem. I don't. And by the way, I stopped being a doormat a long time ago, because we can't serve two masters. We can't be authentic and love ourselves and also try to make everybody else happy. And I know as women, let me tell you, kiddo, we are programmed to do that. Men, sorry, dude, it's not going to happen for you. In some way, yes, but as women, we are definitely programmed from birth to be that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Especially in Christian circles. My mom prayed over me every night that I would have the lasting charm of a gentle and quiet spirit. And as beautiful as that sentiment is, and there is a truth that I am gentle, I am not quiet. And what does quiet even mean? Does that mean that we are subservient or we are a doormat?
You win the bonus prize. Roy Hill Furniture. You've just gotten the whole set. The dining set is yours, because subservient is exactly what they want. Absolutely. Why do you think we're having everything that's going on now? I was raised in that particular environment. These people come from the old school of children are not, they're only seen but not heard, and women are definitely there to support, the male ego and everything else. No. No, not me. I didn't want the white picket fence. I did not.
It reminds me of the line in Yusuf Islam's song where it says, "From the moment I could speak, I was ordered to listen."
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful and so true. Well, let's listen, but let's also learn how to speak to one another and communicate with one another. Because, here's a big secret that a lot of people don't remember. We're all so much more alike than we are different. And we find that out, and all of a sudden we have peace around the world. We do, because we're able to talk to one another.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the church and politics both don't want us to believe that. They want us to believe that there's an us and there's a them, and the thems are never going to be. We're never going to agree with them. So we should do everything in our power to shut them up.
But remember who was the original scapegoat in Christianity, and that's Jesus. Okay. So, we crucified that. I told somebody the other day, we were having a conversation, and I said, Jesus could come down right now, great spaceship, wonderful light show, everything, and they're going to blast him off the planet, because he's not going to come down exactly the way that they envision that he's supposed to come back. So we have to understand that it's the Christ consciousness that we have to teach children. We have to teach them. I think they really are our future. And those people that interact with children like you do really need to be instrumental in that. Not just your own children, but children throughout the world. We need to teach children that we need to be peacekeepers. We need to be respectful. We need to be kind to one another. Because why are they bullying each other? Why are they doing that? Because we're showing them that that's what's supposed to happen. And why are we doing that? Because religion has been contentious from day one.
I think there's just this deep-seated fear within us as humans that if I give of myself for the sake of somebody else, then there's not going to be enough for me. And I think that's
the lack mentality.
Yeah, that lack mentality, the scarcity. Yeah. And so it's, I don't know. I don't know what it means for the future, especially with our kids, but there's already that lack mentality that's kind of, it's like built into their DNA almost, this sense that there's not enough for anybody. And so you have to take what you can instead of listening, instead of being curious, instead of wondering what they get to offer to the world. It's more like, well, what can I get? What can I get? What can I get? And it's a hard fight to fight against those things. I have 3 teenagers, and I feel like every day is a battle, especially with technology. And we have so many different tools in their phones and trying to make sure that they stay off it for most of the day. And even still, they are being discipled every day by other voices that are reminding them that there's not enough and that they have to fight for what's theirs instead of being people that are high integrity and good character and caring for this planet. It's a daily fight.
It is a daily fight, I can imagine. And I don't think that the solutions to all of our problems are very simplistic. But I do think that when we listen to one another, and I think that when we become on the same page of teaching people to love your neighbor as yourself and what that looks like, I think it really will help tremendously. Just imagine if everyone who professed to be a Christian or who loved Jesus, whether they go to church or not. My best friend's an atheist, and he's a wonderful guy who admires people of integrity. Imagine if this becomes our benchmark for success. Just imagine, because that's what I'm doing. I'm imagining. And I think that that's what we all need to do, is imagine that.
Yeah. And it's, we keep coming back to a certain statement, and that is to love your neighbor as yourself. And then of course the story goes that someone asks Jesus, well, who's your neighbor? And then we get the story of the Good Samaritan, right? I find it interesting that it all comes down to love.
Well, it does. But what's interesting, if you've hit on something that I talk about in the book, and that is that if we do not love ourselves first,
right,
we don't know how to love our neighbor.
Right.
And as long as anybody tells us that we're not worth it, that we're sinners, that we're worms, that we're whatever, that's not loving ourselves. And I think that's where questioning comes in. And it's so very important that we actually question what we're being told, because if it's not loving, I don't believe it's of God. Absolutely not. So we need to teach our children to love themselves first so that they can actually love other people. We need to do that too.
Well, and so much of that is teaching them how to be receivers of love as well. I think sometimes, we can say you need to love yourself, you got to love yourself. But if you don't know how to absorb love for yourself, or even recognizing that great divine love, this energy of love that pulsates through the universe, that is going through our bodies all the time. And we don't recognize that, or we can't receive that because of shame and trauma and all sorts of different blocks. It's sometimes we just have to do the hard work of uncovering the shells, the protective layers that we have over ourselves to even be receivers of love.
That's true. And I think we also need to very clearly define love, which is what I do in the book. And that is, love is caring and affection that is always displayed as positive action, even if it means setting a hard boundary. So when I talk about love yourself first by being patient with yourself so that you can be patient with others. Be compassionate with yourself so you can be compassionate with others. I think we need to very clearly define what love is, because it seems to be this thing out here. But it really is the thing that's in here. Because when I respect myself, I know what it feels like to respect myself, and I can respect you. So I think that when we define that, I know there's different types of love, but I cannot have a relationship with anybody that I say that I love and not be kind, cooperative to a certain extent, depending on what day it is. But all of the things, all of the values of love that we think are of integrity. And that's what I talk about, teaching children to be people of integrity. Teach them to love themselves first. Be patient, be kind, be understanding, be forgiving of your mistakes. Don't beat yourself up over it, because if you do, then you're going to beat up the kid next door over their mistakes. So I think that we need to go to what love means. And I think the church has the responsibility, and those people that are not in church have the responsibility to really clearly know what love means and display that love to one another. That's what it means to me to love your neighbor as yourself. And it also means that you have to go across the fence and you have to have some hard conversations when their music is too loud. That's what it means. It's like, dude, I wasn't even invited to the party and it's 2 a.m. and I cannot sleep. So that it means that too. That's what it means to love your neighbor. But you don't just call the police, you go have a conversation first.
Yeah, that is really good. I really like that. And on the opposite side of that, if your view of the way you love yourself is distorted, then the way you love others, it will be distorted. Right?
Absolutely. Because do you really believe that most people love themselves?
My therapist and I have had that conversation a lot. So
I understand. My therapist and I have that conversation a lot too. And it's that, do you really do? Because would we be in this state that we are, that we have to have material things or social media to validate us or whatever? I've got a bunch of people on Facebook. Do you think that makes me feel valuable? No, it does not, because I hope that some of these folks get something out of following me. That's great. But is that my worth? Other people look at that and say, oh my God, that's amazing. No, I don't, because it doesn't validate me. And so that doesn't add to my feelings of self-love. But helping someone adds to my feeling of self-love. You see what I mean? There's a difference. So it's the impact that we make through these particular social media things that is important. So
it's a really healthy perspective to have, truly.
Imagine if all of our children had that perspective too.
Oh, I know.
I do know many, many parents I'm very blessed to know many people that are doing the best that they possibly can to raise children with that perspective. They're not going to be perfect. They're going to have a whole bunch of junk thrown on them, but they still have this idea of what it means to love themselves, to stand up for themselves and stand up for other people.
Yeah, and I see that in my children, right? I see that. I see their willingness to love people who are different than them.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yes. And I wish at their age, when I was their age, I was more in tune with that. I think I'd be a better human being, or I would have been a better human being. But it's a joy to see in my children.
Isn't it wonderful that I am seeing young people that are actually doing what it is that we want? They're being the change that we want to see. So there must be something that we're doing right. I just want to turn the volume up so that we can do a lot more right. That's all. Yeah. But I do see so much positive that's happening. We have to dwell on the positive that's happening.
Yeah, especially right now.
Well, Regina, this was absolutely wonderful to be able to talk with you today. And are there any last thoughts that you have, John or Regina? Anything else you want to share?
I'm not me, but maybe Regina has some last thoughts for us.
Nothing else, John? I can't believe it. Can't believe it. I have to tell you honestly that this has been a wonderful conversation, and thank you for having such a wonderful space where you can entertain ideas, entertain thoughts, entertain everything, and give people an opportunity to think about things maybe in a different way.
Yeah.
We need to have these kinds of conversations constantly, and we need to get as many people involved in these conversations as possible. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
No, we really appreciate you sharing your time with us today.
Yeah,
my
definitely. Pleasure. So your book is The Real Conversation Jesus Wants to Have Us to Have, a call to bravery, peace, and love. Where can people find your work and your Facebook page? Is it just Regina Cates? Where would people find you?
Facebook is Regina V Cates. You can go to my website, Regina V Cates, or Romancing Your Soul. Either one of those work. The book comes out on March 4th. It's going to be available wherever you get your books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore. Just ask for it. It should be available pretty much everywhere.
Wonderful. And friends, especially right now with our political climate and all the changes that are happening and the sense of uncertainty that many people feel in their bodies and in their souls right now, I would recommend picking up this book. It is a breath of fresh air, complete encouragement, and it inspiring to actually live the words of Jesus out in our day-to-day lives. So thank you so much, Regina, for your time and for your words.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.